You're in a place where history becomes accessible and understandable, immersing you in past events. Close your eyes and let yourself relax as we begin the story. The 20th century is remembered as an era of mysteries, rapid scientific discoveries, and devastating conflicts that reshaped humanity. This century saw impressive technological achievements alongside the horrors of global wars, with scientific breakthroughs impacting millions of lives. Nations fought desperately to keep their research secret. The 20th century witnessed numerous secret projects born at the intersection of science, military necessity, and political rivalries. These developments, conducted in strict secrecy, promised countries colossal advantages, making them invincible or at least inaccessible to enemies. Sometimes these projects led to the creation of new weapons and technologies. Other times, they remained mere rumors fueled by fears and speculations. All this unfolded against the backdrop of the Cold War, when the world split into two opposing camps and distrust became the norm. Countries monitored each other with spies, and any unusual information could raise suspicions. In such an atmosphere, incredible tales emerged about secret laboratories and clandestine experiments, about mysterious objects spotted in the sky. During this time, the allure of hidden knowledge was particularly strong. People spoke of atomic labs creating unseen forces of destruction, experiments allowing for teleportation of objects, and weapons capable of influencing consciousness. Some of these stories turned out to be true, forever changing the world, while others remained myths that still linger in our minds, reminding us that the 20th century was a time of both discoveries and secrets. Among all the mysteries of this century, one story stands out. It began with a project that became the foundation for a scientific and military breakthrough: the splitting of the atom. This discovery marked the starting point for one of the largest secret projects in human history. It emerged from fears of Nazi Germany and transformed scientific ideas into weapons that altered the global order. To understand how this happened, we need to return to the roots, to the moment of the first discovery of atomic fission, to the atmosphere of anxiety of those years, and to the creation of secret cities where thousands worked toward a goal most people dared not speak of aloud. In 1938, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann first registered a phenomenon later explained by Lise Meitner: the splitting of uranium nuclei, releasing a tremendous amount of energy. This was purely a scientific discovery, yet the world was already on the brink of war. Many physicists, especially those fleeing Europe, seriously feared that such knowledge could give Germany an unpredictable advantage in warfare. In response to these concerns, in 1939, Leo Szilard, with support from Albert Einstein, wrote a letter to Franklin Delano Roosevelt warning about the potential of atomic weapons and requesting government support for research. This letter sparked the idea of a secret government program. The decision to create the project materialized into the Manhattan Project organization. The military part was led by General Leslie Groves, a practical and disciplined man capable of turning ideas into clear systems. The scientific side fell under the leadership of Robert Oppenheimer, who gathered a team of top physicists, mathematicians, and engineers in Los Alamos. Los Alamos quickly transformed into a closed scientific town, surrounded by strict security. Meanwhile, industrial facilities were being constructed. In Tennessee, massive buildings were erected for uranium enrichment, using both gas diffusion and electromagnetic enrichment developed by Ernest Lawrence. In the Northwest, Hanford built reactors and chemical plants for plutonium production, necessitating solutions to numerous engineering challenges related to heat dissipation and radiation protection. Scientists and engineers had to tackle several key questions simultaneously: how to obtain enriched uranium in the required quantities, how to produce plutonium in reactors, how to calculate critical mass and charge geometry, how to synchronize detonators. Scientific phases of work intersected with industrial ones. In 1942, in Chicago, Enrico Fermi and his team achieved the first controlled chain reaction in an experimental setup, confirming that a chain reaction was possible and under control. This was an important step from theory to practice that provided confidence to move forward. The work process was fraught with constant challenges. Many technologies had to be mastered from scratch. Equipment occupied entire workshops, and significant electrical power was needed, so factories were located where it could be supplied. There were accidents and instances of radiation exposure, and little was known about long-term effects then. Safety measures evolved as the project progressed. Moral dilemmas also arose within the project. Some scientists, including those who later signed petitions, questioned whether to use such devices against cities and civilians. However, under total war conditions and time pressure, work continued step by step through debates and engineering innovations. Thus, from a scientific discovery and political fear, a complex and well-coordinated system was born, a network of laboratories, factories, and closed communities. Each element of this network knew only part of the larger task, but together they turned theory into reality, possessing material and political power previously unknown to humanity. Work on two types of weapons progressed simultaneously since time was of the essence in wartime, and there were no guarantees which path would be more effective. One project was based on uranium-235. This isotope was rare and challenging to extract, but the bomb's concept was relatively simple. Two pieces of enriched uranium had to collide, like a bullet and a target, triggering a chain reaction upon impact. This design was called a gun-type assembly, and the bomb itself was named Little Boy. Its merits lay in its structural simplicity, but it required a large amount of enriched material, which posed challenges in acquisition. The second path relied on plutonium, produced in reactors. Plutonium behaved differently, and a simple gun-type assembly might not suffice. There was a risk of premature detonation, leading to the development of a more complex design where a plutonium sphere was compressed simultaneously from all sides using special charges. This became extremely critical. Special explosive lenses and complex charges were created to precisely direct the shockwave inward. The development of such lenses and detonators, synchronized to the millisecond, became a remarkable engineering achievement. This technology was used to assemble Fat Man. Once the designs were completed and all technical aspects fine-tuned, it was time for testing. At dawn, in the desert near Albuquerque, New Mexico, the world's first nuclear device test, named Trinity, took place. On that day, the light became more vivid than anyone could imagine, and a shape appeared in the sky, symbolizing a new era. Many attendees later spoke of mixed emotions, joy from the successful experiment and the weight of realizing potential consequences. The decision to use this weapon against Japanese cities came during a time when war had claimed countless lives. The first atomic bomb, named Little Boy, dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. At the moment of the explosion, an incredible wave of light and heat surged through the city center. Destruction and death struck instantly for thousands, while many survivors later succumbed to injuries and radiation. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, the second bomb, Fat Man, fell on Nagasaki. These strikes hastened the surrender process, and soon the war in Asia came to an end. However, they left deep and long-lasting scars, physical and psychological, for individuals and society as a whole. The aftermath included not just immediate casualties and destruction, but also long-term health issues for survivors, social trauma, and ethical questions that humanity would ponder for long. The use of atomic weapons opened a new chapter in international relations. The world would never be the same. The existence of such weapons became a crucial factor that could not be ignored. After the war, an arms race began. nations sought to acquire or maintain nuclear balance. The system of deterrence and mutually assured destruction became the foundation of international security and a constant source of tension. New institutions and agreements emerged aimed at controlling proliferation and testing. At the same time, nuclear infrastructure, both military and civilian, developed in world capitals. Peaceful energy production stations were created, and programs for developing new types of warheads expanded. The cultural impact of these events was equally significant. The image of the mushroom cloud, scenes of destruction and survivor stories reflected in literature, film, music, and visual arts. Artistic works try to make sense of new knowledge about the potential end of civilization, often through the lens of absurdity, anxiety, or tragedy. Themes of nuclear horror and paranormal unease began to appear in popular culture. In everyday life, civil defense practices and rescue drills aim to make this troubling prospect somewhat manageable. In science and philosophy, discussions arose about the moral responsibility of scientists, the ethical boundaries of research, and ways to prevent catastrophic consequences that new technologies could bring. The Manhattan Project and the first use of atomic bombs demonstrated how scientific discoveries could instantly become political and military realities. This was a turning point. The combination of technical expertise, military logic, and political decisions created a world where one technology changed the rules of global security and human thought. This legacy persists in institutions, cultural memory, and cautious efforts aimed at minimizing the likelihood of such tragedies repeating. The Manhattan Project showed that secret scientific developments could change the entire world. However, not all stories about secret projects from that time are based on facts. Alongside real programs, myths emerged such as the Philadelphia experiment, which grew in detail and spread through word of mouth. One such story became the tale of the Philadelphia experiment, which surfaced during World War II and quickly gained a mystical aura. It spoke of a ship that allegedly vanished from radar and even teleported. Unlike the atomic project, this version lacks credible evidence, but that's what makes it so appealing. It straddles the line between science, myth, and human imagination. The legend of the Philadelphia experiment is one of the most mysterious stories of World War II. It claims that everything occurred in 1943 when American military forces supposedly tried to make a warship invisible. The main character of this story was the USS Eldridge, the most advanced ship of its time, based at a naval yard in Philadelphia. According to the legend, during the experiment, powerful generators and special equipment were installed aboard to create an electromagnetic field around the hull. During the tests, Eldridge first disappeared from radar screens, then vanished from the sight of witnesses. A few minutes later, it allegedly reappeared, but in a different location. Some versions claim that the ship teleported hundreds of kilometers to Norfolk and almost instantly returned. These tales included dramatic details about the crew's fate. It was said that some sailors lost their sanity, others fell ill, and some found themselves embedded in the ship's metal bulkheads, as if their bodies merged with the metal. These images became some of the most frightening and striking moments of the story, firmly establishing the legend in the public consciousness. So, where did this rumor originate? It was first detailed by Carlos Allende, or Carl Allen, a merchant sailor who claimed to have witnessed the experiment. In the 1950s, he wrote several letters to ufologist Morris Jessup, sharing his unusual experience and adding more details. Jessup was fascinated by his stories and began discussing the narrative publicly. Gradually, a whole network of retellings and speculations formed around it. In the 1960s, the storyline about the ship's teleportation was already a topic in ufology circles. It found its way into magazines and books, eventually inspiring films and novels. Why did people believe in this legend? Several factors converged. Firstly, the atmosphere of war and the post-war years, when secrecy was common. During this time, real classified projects like the Manhattan Project existed, and rumors about incredible technologies found fertile ground. Secondly, the very idea of invisibility and teleportation seemed plausible. Humanity had just unlocked atomic energy, and it appeared that science could achieve almost anything. Thirdly, the legend had a basis connecting it to reality. The military indeed conducted research aimed at disguising ships. For example, there was a degaussing technology that helped make hulls less detectable to magnetic mines. Ships were indeed surrounded by special cables through which electric current was passed. This altered the magnetic field and protected against detonation. However, to outside observers, such actions looked unusual. Wires stretched around the hull, generators operated, and electric energy sparked above the deck, which could easily give rise to rumors. Research into invisibility continued, including experiments with camouflage paints, smoke screens, and radar jamming systems. Yet all of this remained within the bounds of known scientific knowledge. Teleportation and complete invisibility remained out of reach. Nevertheless, in eyewitness accounts and retellings, these ordinary studies grew into myths. Over time, the legend surrounding the destroyer acquired new details. Rumors surfaced that Albert Einstein participated in the experiments and that secret laboratories were involved in developing powerful electromagnetic devices. This story began to take on a life of its own, and each new publication added vivid details, transforming the real destroyer into a symbol of mysterious technologies. Despite numerous debates, no documentary evidence of such an experiment was ever found. The USS Eldridge operated normally and was later transferred to Greece, where it continued service under a different flag. The fate of a ship with such a legend would be strange if it had actually survived the fantastic experiment. As World War II drew to a close, the Allies faced not only destruction in Germany, but also its scientific advancements. German engineers had developed technologies that surpassed their time. The rockets dropped on London and Antwerp became the first ballistic weapons. Jet fighters demonstrated that piston-driven planes were outdated. New submarines boasted improved stealth systems. All this seemed incredible, but resulted from total warfare. The United States and the Soviet Union quickly realized that whoever captured German scientists would gain a significant advantage in the upcoming arms race. Thus, even before combat ended, a covert struggle for technologies and minds of the Third Reich began. The American operation, called Operation Paperclip, symbolized this ambition. Biographies of German specialists were rewritten, removing mentions of their party affiliation and collaboration with the Nazi regime. Scientists, once war criminals, became valuable assets for the new country. The most famous among them became Wernher von Braun, who led rocket development during the war. These rockets killed thousands, but in the US, he became a symbol of the space program. His team helped create rockets that eventually sent astronauts to the moon. Hundreds of German engineers were brought to America, working on military bases. Their contributions proved invaluable, as without their expertise, Americans would have taken much longer to master space. The concept of intercontinental ballistic missiles was also borrowed from German developments. The successes of the American space program became possible thanks to those very paperclips used to craft biographies. However, this story has a dark side. Many scientists brought over weren't just specialists. They were members of the Nazi Party who exploited prisoner labor for rocket production. Under inhumane conditions, thousands died from hunger and exhaustion. After the war, these facts were suppressed, and unfavorable lines in documents were deleted or rewritten. During the Cold War, pragmatism overshadowed morality. The key point was that specialists could be beneficial in the confrontation with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union acted quickly as well, capturing numerous facilities in East Germany, including factories. Soviet troops seized blueprints and engineers, who then worked in closed cities under the supervision of Soviet designers. Their efforts contributed to the creation of the first Soviet ballistic missile. Later, these developments formed the basis of the Soviet space program, leading to the launch of the first satellite and the first human in space. Thus, the post-war hunt for scientists kick-started a new race in both the space and nuclear spheres. The United States and the Soviet Union competed not only in ideologies, but also in who could faster utilize the legacy of the Third Reich. The Americans first landed a man on the moon, while the Soviets launched a satellite and a person into space. All these achievements became possible because both powers weren't shy about employing the labor of those who had recently worked for Hitler. Project Paperclip and similar operations illustrated that in politics and science, moral assessments often give way to practical concerns. For Americans, von Braun became a space hero despite his connection to thousands of deceased prisoners. For the Soviet Union, German engineers represented a temporary resource that accelerated their own research. This story is perceived controversially. On one hand, without it, the modern phase of the space era might not exist. On the other hand, it serves as a reminder that progress often relies on compromises best left unspoken. It's not just a secret project. It reflects the Cold War, where science and politics intertwined with ethics and memories of tragedies. After the Paperclip saga, it becomes apparent how the rivalry between the two superpowers encompassed all fields of knowledge. The United States and the Soviet Union sought to outpace each other, not only in nuclear and space projects, but also in areas straddling science and myth. While the US developed projects related to reports of unidentified flying objects, the Soviet Union took an interest in flying saucers and unexplained phenomena in the sky. Soviet ufology, spanning the 60s to the 80s, became part of mass culture, but had a unique tint in the USSR. In a country with strict censorship, where science fiction was viewed as veiled criticism, tales of strange objects provided an outlet for curiosity and a source of anxiety for authorities. While civilian enthusiasts saw this as evidence of extraterrestrial visitors, military and intelligence officials primarily worried about whether the sightings concealed technology from a potential adversary. Consequently, the KGB and military structures had special teams that collected and classified such cases. Pilots and sailors reported unusual lights and objects seen in the sky or over water. This data was kept in classified archives. Some records were disclosed in the 90s, showing that such sightings were documented quite systematically. The documents included dates, locations, weather conditions, and witness descriptions. One area where flying objects were frequently reported was Karelia. In the 70s, bright glowing spheres and cigars hovered over forests and bodies of water. Some witnesses claimed they saw landings that left impressions in the ground and scorched grass. In Tbilisi, in the early 80s, hundreds of people observed a glow over the city. It later turned out that this coincided with a test launch of a rocket, but at the time, it sparked real interest and was discussed almost as an encounter with aliens. Soviet ufology often recalled the Tunguska event of 1908. Although the scientific explanation of a meteorite or comet impact was deemed most likely, ufologists linked the event to the crash of an alien spacecraft. This version persisted in popular literature for a long time, acquiring new details. In reality, many sightings had perfectly earthly explanations: atmospheric phenomena, unusual clouds, auroras or ball lightning, and sometimes secret military tests. The Soviet Union actively developed rocket and aviation technologies, and witnesses, lacking access to information, perceived these as unidentified objects. Under conditions of secrecy, such observations easily turned into rumors passed from mouth to mouth for years. Interestingly, Soviet ufology developed almost parallel to the American one. In the United States, in the early 50s, they launched a project that collected tens of thousands of UFO reports. Although most cases were explained by ordinary phenomena, a small fraction remained unidentified, fueling public interest. The situation in the Soviet Union was similar. Official commissions closed cases with explanations, yet many incidents lacked clear answers. Thus, UFO-related programs in the Soviet Union became part of the broader Cold War narrative. On one hand, they aimed to monitor the skies and understand air activities over the country. On the other hand, they fueled mass imagination and mythology, creating fertile ground for legends. In the USSR, stories of strange objects served as a means to discuss the unknown amid stringent censorship, explaining why myths about Soviet flying saucers endure, highlighting the thin line between secret projects and fantasy. After discussing Soviet UFO programs, it becomes clear that during the Cold War, any unusual topic caught the attention of intelligence agencies. If unidentified lights in the sky could be perceived as enemy technology, the human mind caused even greater concern. What if one could learn to influence thoughts and behavior, compel someone to speak the truth, or control them from a distance? In an atmosphere of total competition, ideas about mind control seemed less like science fiction and more like potential weaponry. This led to projects intertwining science and covert research. The American program known as MK Ultra and Soviet studies of so-called psychotronic weapons exemplify this. Interest in mind influence didn't emerge from nowhere in the post-war decades. The times were tense. The Cold War, spies, torture, and counterintelligence. All of this related to the feeling that any new technology could provide a decisive edge. In the United States, under CIA supervision, a program aimed at finding methods to make someone tell the truth, alter their behavior, or suppress an opponent's will emerged in the mid-20th century. Experiments spanned a wide range, from LSD influence and sensory deprivation to hypnosis and electrostimulation. Often, research occurred without the consent of subjects, who included patients in psychiatric clinics, prisoners, or unsuspecting citizens. During Senate hearings in the 1970s, some of these practices were revealed, causing public outcry and leading to the closure of many programs and stricter ethical standards. Concurrently, the Soviet Union conducted research that gained recognition as psychotronic weapons. Under this banner, various topics were discussed and studied. Searches for bioplasma, the impact of electromagnetic radiation on living organisms, hypnosis, telekinesis, telepathy, and remote perception experiments. Often, these activities happened in semi-official or covert forms. Some studies took place in psychophysiology institutes, while others occurred in military establishments. Reports went to closed KGB or Ministry of Defense archives. Like in the US, these projects stemmed from genuine fears. What if the enemy already had mind control techniques or could read thoughts? This gave rise to rumors about thought-reading machines. The scientific basis for such stories lies in electroencephalography, which records brain electrical activity. By the mid-20th century, scientists could already measure brain signals, but it was far from literally reading thoughts. An electroencephalogram only shows a general picture, waves and rhythms, correlates of states, not specific thoughts. Later, with advancements in functional magnetic resonance imaging and machine learning algorithms, experiments emerged to recreate conditional images or words based on brain activity. However, this too remains a distant and condition-sensitive outcome. Thus, a thought-reading machine is fiction, while a device aiding in interpreting neural activity under controlled conditions is a scientific reality, but not a mass weapon. Separating reality from mystifications, the picture looks like this. Real attempts involved using psychological pressure in interrogations, studying the effects of electromagnetic fields on organisms in laboratory conditions, and projects for remote observation. In the US, for example, in the 1970s and 1980s, programs emerged where individuals attempted to see distant objects, training their intuition. Some of these programs had practical applications and closed when no real benefits appeared. Most exotic claims, however, remained urban legends. Teleportation of consciousness, distance control of people in combat, and mass zombification didn't materialize and relied on weak evidence. So why did the government continue funding such research if their effectiveness was questionable? The answer lies in a combination of three simple reasons. First, there was the psychological factor and fear of missing something critical in a competitive environment where the opponent used any unusual technology. Missing a potential advantage seemed perilous. It was better to invest in a dubious idea than to find oneself in a disadvantageous position. Additionally, many studies had significantly lower costs compared to nuclear or space technology programs. Small financial resources allowed for laboratory experiments with potential for significant discoveries, and activity in these areas helped reduce strategic vulnerability. Second, some studies led to positive legal outcomes. Work in psychology, neurophysiology, and pharmacology opened new horizons that later found applications in medicine, rehabilitation, brain examination methods, and treating mental disorders. In summary, results were often sobering and tragic. Many grand promises remained unmet. None of the known psychotronic weapons demonstrated rapid and practical effects capable of shifting power dynamics. However, these projects left their mark. Tragic fates of innocent subjects, ethical scandals, changes in legislation, and prolonged discussions about the limits of science. At the same time, the question of mind control and extracting its content fostered the development of neuroscience, creating new diagnostic and therapeutic methods, as well as defining the boundaries of the possible. Ultimately, one could argue that the idea of mind control was both a reflection of its time and a rational attempt to find tools for gaining an advantage. Much of this turned out to be mere fantasy and myths, while other aspects yielded limited results and scientific achievements. Yet it was the combination of fear, ambition, and science that made this topic one of the darkest yet most fascinating chapters of the Cold War. After reviewing psychotronic programs, it's clear that during the Cold War, any unusual idea, even the most controversial, could become the subject of serious research. If state structures allocated funds for attempts to influence consciousness, projects related to natural forces attracted even more attention. The ability to control the atmosphere, weather, or even earthquakes was perceived as a threat more serious than any psychological influence. It was against this backdrop that one of the most famous stories about secret technologies emerged, a project conducted in Alaska, intertwining real scientific challenges and myths about climate weapons. The project focused on studying the ionosphere and became known as a program for high-frequency active research. The laboratory sat in a remote area, far from major cities, and included a network of tall antennas transmitting radio waves into the upper layers of the atmosphere. It looked impressive, creating the feel of a secret facility. The project's real objectives were scientific and applied, focusing on studying atmospheric layers where charged particles interact with radio waves. Understanding these processes is crucial for reliable radio communication, navigation systems, and predicting interference that might disrupt contact with ships and airplanes. The project aimed to address questions about why communication fails over long distances, how to enhance radio signals, and how to minimize interference for satellite navigation. Additionally, by studying subtle effects in the ionosphere, scientists gathered data for radar beyond the horizon and understanding space weather impacting electronics and power grids. The project used ion layer heating by sending directed radio waves to induce minor changes and explore how those changes spread and interact with natural phenomena like auroras and solar storms. These were localized, measurable experiments, yet a whole network of conspiracy theories arose around the project. The most common claims suggested that the installation could control the weather, trigger earthquakes, or even influence people's thoughts. These ideas stemmed from the visual impact of many antennas and strange bursts that captured the imagination. Moreover, military support and research contracts fostered an atmosphere of secrecy, raising suspicions of concealing something significant. The complex physics, difficult for the general audience to grasp, contributed to the formation of frightening hypotheses. The scientific side, in turn, offers a more mundane explanation. In terms of power and radiation characteristics, the project lacked the necessary energy base or mechanisms to control the climate on a regional or global level. Changing the weather requires energy levels vastly exceeding a ground transmitter's capacity. The same applies to earthquakes, as seismic processes occur at depths of tens to hundreds of kilometers, making surface influence impossible. Modern neuroscience methods need direct contact with the nervous system and complex equipment, rendering remote mind control unattainable. Nevertheless, the project became a symbol of a secret weapon of modern times, intersecting several powerful trends. People fear hidden programs, especially military ones. Science explained in complex language breeds suspicion. Popular culture, books, movies, and internet forums quickly embraced the idea of a weather-controlling complex, as it's dramatic and visual. As a result, the project evolved into a sort of contemporary folklore figure. Many legends about it exist not because they're easy to verify, but because they're emotionally compelling. It's vital to remember the balance. Real research in Alaska provided valuable data on radio waves and the ionosphere's interaction, helped to understand the nature of interference, and contributed to applied physics. Legends about elemental control serve as reminders of how rapid misunderstandings of science lead to fears and myths. After discussing the project and myths surrounding climate weapons, it's noticeable that the more secrecy there is, the stronger legends emerge. Unlike rumors about ionospheric studies, there were indeed dangerous developments hidden in the biological sphere. In the mid-20th century, both the United States and the Soviet Union began creating combat microorganisms and viruses, reflecting the realities of the Cold War, showing that threats could come not only from nuclear weapons, but also from tiny microbes escaping laboratories. In the post-war decades, biological issues quickly rose in priority for the military and intelligence services of both countries. The idea of using microorganisms to harm people or agriculture opened new avenues for impact. In reality, this meant funding research in microbiology, epidemiology, aerobiology, and pharmacology, along with other related fields. Establishing closed infrastructures where work aimed at military applications occurred under the guise of medical and scientific institutions became a pressing issue. In the United States, a significant center for such research was a military medical base, where experiments on biological agents and protective methods occurred from the 1940s to the 1960s. The country also had an official biological weapon development program. However, in late 1960, President Richard Nixon announced halting offensive biological weapons development, shifting efforts to medical protection and disease control. This marked the beginning of political changes. Experiments once deemed acceptable in the context of confrontation now fell under public scrutiny and ethical standards. Nevertheless, research on biosafety, vaccine prevention, and threat detection persisted in the United States, indicating protective rather than offensive actions. The Soviet Union developed its programs on a different level and with greater secrecy. The USSR officially signed international agreements, but simultaneously operated secret facilities that historians and journalists refer to as biopreparat. This comprised a vast network of scientific and production centers conducting research on pathogens, developing resistant strains, and creating mass production technologies for biological agents and their storage. Often, work occurred in closed scientific towns under the pretext of pharmaceuticals or veterinary medicine, but in reality, these were military programs. In the 1990s, after the Soviet Union's collapse, part of this structure and related facts became the subject of exposure. Some former employees revealed the scale and goals of the programs. Documents and testimonies emerged, confirming discrepancies between official statements and reality. One of the most alarming events was the incident in Sverdlovsk in 1979, where an anthrax spore leak occurred. The city and its surroundings reported severe illness cases, resulting in dozens of deaths and many suffering from severe forms of the disease. Initially, authorities attributed this to contaminated sausage, but in the post-Soviet period, evidence and documents surfaced linking it to a leak from a closed military facility. This incident became a rare yet vivid example of how working with dangerous microorganisms under secrecy can lead to catastrophic consequences for civilians. In response to such events, the international community began developing regulations and containment mechanisms. In 1972, a convention was adopted prohibiting the development, production, and stockpiling of bacteriological, biological, and toxin weapons. The treaty established a ban on offensive biological weapons and set principles for international responsibility. Formally, many states signed and ratified this document, but in practice, ensuring compliance proved difficult. Biology has dual-use potential. A laboratory dealing with infectious diseases for peaceful purposes is technically close to one that can produce dangerous agents. The lack of a comprehensive inspection system and control complexities meant suspicions of covert activities continued to arise. The development of biodefense became a response to these threats. Key directions like early outbreak detection, development, vaccines, and methods for ensuring sanitary and epidemiological safety received significant funding. There was extensive work on creating norms and practices for biosafety, training personnel, and international cooperation in emergency response. Partly, the modern epidemiological infrastructure, including labs that can detect pathogens, monitoring networks, and rapid vaccine development methods, emerged from defense programs. Two important aspects of this story should be noted. First, the biological programs of the 20th century demonstrated a terrible vulnerability. The threat can come not only from a large factory or nuclear weapon, but also from knowledge hidden in labs that could have catastrophic consequences if leaked or misused. Second, attempts to use biology for military purposes had the opposite effect, fostering advancements in science for protection and healthcare, diagnostics and vaccines, as well as creating international mechanisms and a legal framework, albeit imperfect. After the stories of the biological programs in the US and the Soviet Union, it seems humanity has tried every possible way to create weapons of mass destruction, from microbes to nuclear warheads. However, the Cold War spawned new ideas, sometimes bordering on science fiction. In search of an advantage, military designers focused on the harshest and most inaccessible corners of the planet. One such project was a plan to establish an underwater base in Greenland, where nuclear missiles could be stored and launched near the enemy. By the late 1950s, the idea of an underwater base sounded almost like a plot from a science fiction novel. Hidden tunnels, absolute silence of the surrounding ice, underground garages, and even a power station were supposed to ensure stealth in moving and deploying systems beneath the glacier mass. This concept was backed by real military logic. The Cold War required places to place weapons that were difficult to detect and destroy. The project, known as Iceworm, aimed to position ballistic missiles and necessary infrastructure under thick ice, close to potential adversary territory, while keeping it secure. The practical basis for Iceworm was an experimental complex created in 1959 in western Greenland, near the Arctic Circle. On the surface, it looked like a small settlement with barracks, workshops, and a medical station. However, underground, engineers laid a network of tunnels and spaces that extended deep into the ice. To ensure autonomy, a compact nuclear power plant was delivered to the complex, providing electricity for heating and equipment in situations where regular fuel supplies would be challenging. The tunnel construction had an almost laboratory level. Modular blocks and specially reinforced corridors required constant maintenance. The idea was to create an underwater network where launch sites, storage facilities, and support personnel could be concealed from conventional detection methods. The project also considered the possibility of mobile underwater complexes that could navigate through tunnels while remaining out of sight of satellites and radar for extended periods. However, nature proved stronger than engineering imagination. Ice isn't a static substance. It's a living, slowly moving mass. Under its own weight, ice begins to creep, layers shift, and cracks and deformations form. This phenomenon, known as ice creep, led to unexpected consequences for the underwater structures. Tunnels gradually compressed, modules deformed, and communications lost alignment. Even the strongest structures faced constant pressure, requiring ongoing repairs. Additionally, snow accumulation and dense layers complicated ventilation and cargo delivery, while access to the facilities became increasingly challenging. Stealth gradually lost its significance over time. Advancements in surveillance technology, including satellite reconnaissance and aerial photography, demonstrated that hiding large infrastructure under ice isn't as easy as initially thought. The logistics of such bases, their support and supply, as well as evacuation, demanded constant efforts and faced risks and challenges. In total, the instability of ice, the complexity of technical maintenance, and the growing threat of detection became reasons why the ICWM project wasn't fully realized. Engineering difficulties and strategic considerations outweighed initial enthusiasm. By the mid-1960s, the Camp Century complex and ideas about large bases under ice were reconsidered. However, the project remained a significant symbol of its time, reflecting the superpowers' desire to find solutions near the enemy, placing their resources in remote and seemingly safe locations. Ideas like Iceworm sparked imagination and became the basis for legends about secret bases hidden under ice, where weapons could be deployed at any moment and traces could be discreetly concealed. The symbolism of these projects is more important than their actual results. Camp Century and Iceworm became symbols of the Cold War, where technology and geography intersected in attempts to secure an advantage while facing natural limitations. These stories remind us that engineering audacity often encounters physical barriers, and many projects born from rivalry remained intriguing yet unfulfilled ideas. The tale of the Iceworm project and secret bases under Greenland illustrates how Cold War military engineers search for the most unexpected ways to ensure nuclear superiority, both under Arctic ice and in underground tunnels. But even more far-reaching were the Soviet strategists, who devised a system that could operate even if command was destroyed. Thus, one of the darkest and most mysterious legends of the Cold War emerged: the automatic retaliation system known as Perimeter. This automatic counter-strike system became known in the West as Dead Hand. The idea of an automatic response system arose in a context where both sides, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, possessed significant nuclear arsenals, and military leaders constantly feared what would happen if command was destroyed by a first strike and could not issue a counterattack order. In such circumstances, extreme but logical options were considered to maintain the capability for retaliation, even if all command centers were incapacitated. Perimeter became the Soviet military engineers' answer to this scenario, ensuring that in the event of a catastrophe, a counterstrike would still occur. This system didn't consist of a single device. It was a complex network of sensors, situational analysis algorithms, and communication channels that could automatically transmit a launch command to the launch sites during a crisis. The sensors were positioned at the boundary of reconnaissance and early warning, seismic stations, atmospheric pressure recorders, radiation indicators, radio signal receivers, and communication control systems. With their help, the system could monitor several signs, such as seismic signatures of explosions, characteristic of a nuclear blast, sharp spikes in gamma and neutron radiation, mass communication outages, and the disappearance of radio signals from command levels. The combination of such signs allowed the system to assess that a massive nuclear strike had occurred against the country, and Central Command was likely incapacitated. The decision-making algorithm was a key component of the system, concentrating most concerns and questions. In normal mode, command remained in human hands. Decisions were made, codes and orders were issued, and communication channels were checked. Perimeter functioned as a backup mechanism. If central nodes became inaccessible, if communication with higher command broke, and sensors detected signs of a massive strike, the system shifted to automatic alert mode. After confirming several parameters, it could send a launch signal through predetermined channels. Some public sources mentioned that both radio channels and special command rockets were used to transmit commands. These rockets could relay encoded commands for launch while flying over missile bases. This element, autonomous command relay, fueled many legends and frightening images of a machine pressing the button. It's important to note that the exact details of the system's implementation and functioning remain classified. Much is known only from open or partially classified sources, testimonies of individual military personnel, and publications in post-Soviet media. After the USSR's collapse and a decrease in secrecy, former officers and designers began speaking out, confirming the existence of automatic control and alert systems, calling Perimeter a real tested system. Publicly available photographs, document excerpts, and oral testimonies emerged indicating the project's existence and its periodic functionality. However, details such as the exact set of sensors, threshold logic, command relay methods, and degree of autonomy remain partially or completely secret, allowing speculation and vague narratives to easily permeate public consciousness. The concept of the dead hand emerged as a vivid image. If command is dead, the machine will still activate. In media and artistic interpretations, this transformed into the myth of the Doomsday Button, a device that could single-handedly destroy civilization. However, reality proved to be more complex and pragmatic. The system was designed as a deterrent mechanism. Cold War logic held that nothing guaranteed safety, as the reliability of mutual destruction depended on the fact that even if the enemy attempted a first strike, a guaranteed response would still follow, reducing the incentive to attack. From this perspective, Perimeter became the last argument in the deterrence system, signaling that an attack would not go unpunished. Why does the system still provoke debate and fears? Firstly, there's a risk of mistaken activation. Any automatic system based on sensors and algorithms can malfunction. An earthquake, a large man-made explosion, or a mass communication blackout for non-military reasons could be misinterpreted, especially amid chaos. Secondly, there's a moral aspect. The willingness to delegate the decision for a nuclear strike to automation raises deep concerns and questions about human responsibility. Thirdly, after the Soviet Union's collapse, discussions around Perimeter echoed fears that systems developed under strict secrecy might retain their autonomy amidst changing political climates, and that new leadership might not fully understand their functioning. Practice showed that Russian military leadership in the post-Soviet era recognized the importance of such systems for deterrence and periodically modernized elements of automated control. Public statements and open sources indicate that ideas of automatic alerts and command reserves remain part of the nuclear parity management concept. At the same time, there's now an emphasis on communication channel reliability and maintaining human control in decision-making processes. Debates continue on whether this increases the risk of an unexpected strike or conversely strengthens the deterrence system. Discussions persist in military, political, and scientific circles. Perimeter represents not only an engineering solution for situations where the entire command staff could be eliminated, but also a symbol of the caution fostered by the Cold War. On one hand, it's a technical approach to the problem. On the other, a reminder of how close humanity came to a moment when the fate of many could depend on a few sensors and algorithms. This duality, fear and logic, make the concept of the dead hand one of the most memorable pages in the history of nuclear deterrence. In conclusion, the 20th century became an era when secret projects and rumors intertwined so closely that it was sometimes hard to distinguish reality from fiction. The Manhattan Project demonstrated how science could change the course of history, while the Philadelphia experiment and UFO research programs spawned numerous rumors and fantasies in a climate of secrecy. Psychotronic weapons and climate intervention projects became examples of how fears and expectations endowed real research with almost mystical significance. Biological programs like IceWorm and Perimeter reminded us that the Cold War sought solutions, even at the edge of the fantastic. Together, all this created a rich collection of stories where reality intertwines with myths. These events reflected the tensions and ambitions of that time. Perhaps that's why they still captivate interest. The mysteries of the 20th century stand as a testament to how close humanity came to its limits.